Good morning, everybody in Europe. Good afternoon, everybody in China. This is Ludmila Hiklova, Market Advisor at the EUSME Center, and you have just joined the EUSME Center webinar on how to deal with Chinese partners and build lasting trust relationships. Before we go to the topic of today's seminars, I would like to first, for those who have joined us for the first time, introduce some technicalities of the webinar. You can see on your screen the small panel and with number of functions, and one of those functions are the questions. So if you have any question during the webinar, please do not hesitate and write it, send it to us, and we will, or our speaker will address it at the end of our webinar. In case we do not manage to answer all your questions, we will send the email reply to you during the following week. Again, for those who are for the first time at our webinar series, let me shortly introduce services of our EUSME Center. The EUSME Center in Beijing is a project funded by the European Union, and our main task is to provide those small and medium-sized enterprises from the Europe to export to China and invest to China. We provide all our services free of charge, and we keep the utmost confidentiality of the information provided to us and advice we provide. As I mentioned, our support consists of providing information and advice. We reply to the inquiries. We publish a number of documents like the reports, guidelines, case studies. We hold trainings and webinars as this one. In addition to that, we provide support services like hot desking. In case you wish to stay for a few days or a few weeks in Beijing, you can stay with us in our offices. And we as well provide matchmaking and networking services. Our expertise consists or covers areas business development, legal and tax, standards and conformity, HR and training. From our recent publications, I would like to mention for those who are thinking coming to the China or doing business in China, I would like to mention our diagnostic kit, which includes 4 reports on macroeconomics in China, ways to enter the Chinese market, exporting goods, services and technology, and knowing your partners in China. The whole diagnostic kit is accompanied by very interesting quiz, which will help you to assess where you are about the knowledge and the experience relating to the Chinese market. You can connect with us via our online portal, eusmecenter.org.cn. And after the very short and very fast registration, we provide all our services as mentioned on the screen. Knowledge Center, including all 80+ publications. You can be updated on all events and webinar calendar. So now coming to the topic of today. I must say that during our trainings, seminars and the presentations in China and in the Europe, we usually receive many questions related to the cultural differences, best practices in negotiation with Chinese partner. So we have decided that we dedicate one of our webinar to this topic. And for this, we have invited a speaker who I introduce very shortly. But before that, I would like to launch a first poll and ask you a question related to your experience in China. So give me a few seconds to to launch the polls. And I would like to ask the question, have your China experience so far been disastrous, mixed feelings, positive, in general, very pleasant, or no experience so far? And I can see you voting, and yeah, your votes are coming. Okay, so I'm closing the poll now, and I share with you the results. And majority of you have experience with China, and you have a mixed feelings with it. And the second is a positive in general, followed by no experience so far. So this, I believe, will help our speaker as well to assess our audience and to focus during her presentation. So now let me introduce our speaker, Mrs. N. Zhang. Mrs. N. Zhang is an experienced business developer, manager, consultant, trainer, and writer with more than 18 years of experience spanning executive education, infrastructure, and banking industries in China and Europe. Mrs. Zhang is a consultant and a guest speaker at top international business schools. She is a trainer for global corporations and regularly contributes to Thomson Reuters Westlaw Journal. She is as well co-author of Doing Business with China, Avoiding the Pitfalls. So I believe that she is the best person who can tell us about how to deal with Chinese partners and build a lasting trust and relationship. Mrs. Zhang, I give the floor to you.
Thanks, Ludmila, for the introduction. Before we start, actually, I wanted to briefly introduce you my European experience. The first time I ever set foot in continental Europe was in 2000. I had a brief stop in the UK on my way back from the States. My second trip was to Paris in France. At that time, France was not open to Chinese individual tourists, yet I was determined to go. The whole process of getting my individual visa went like a movie drama. We can talk about it later if we have time. Never had I thought of that at that point of time that one day I'd have lived in that part of the world. In 2002, I went to IMD in Lausanne for my MBA study. And ever since then, I had been working and living in Switzerland, between Switzerland and China, and building bridges between China and Europe. So I'll just quickly introduce what we are going to talk about today. Today's webinar, we will be presented in several key parts. First is how to find a Chinese business partner and verify his or her trustworthiness. And the second of all, who are your key counterparts that you are going to deal with? And third, the common challenges faced by EU SMEs in China. And then we will talk about the broad context of Chinese business culture and some of the tips that we believe would be helpful for you to how to deal with it, and some of the best practices and other practicality. So first, how to find a Chinese business partner and verify her or his trustworthiness. The EU SME Center had a previous report on knowing your partners in China. It has explained in great details the due diligence process of finding the right partner in China and the importance of finding the right partners. So we're not going to spend more time on this today here in this webinar, but please go back and refer to that report when you have time later. So who are you dealing with? To successfully build trust in relationships, negotiate and deal with Chinese partners, you need to first know who you are dealing with. As Sun Tzu said, know yourself, you know your enemy. You will win hundreds of battles. The graph below has classified some of the key business partners that EU SMEs would encounter at different stages of their investment. For instance, agents, service providers and intermediaries, landlord, public authorities, distributors or potential buyers for your goods, manufacturers if you are in manufacturing locally in China, internally joint venture partners if applicable, and employees and any other business partners that you may encounter. What are the common challenges faced by EU SMEs in China?
Yeah, in this point, let me intervene and just launch very quickly the second poll, and it's just to find out your opinion. What is the biggest challenge which EU SMEs faces in China? I mean, no answer is correct. We are just looking for your opinion. To share with us, and I believe then Mrs. Zhang will address it later on. So we are seeing your votes coming. Yeah, it's so surprising. I mean, almost no, very few people think that the economical problems are the most serious one. Okay, I'm closing the poll now, so you can see the results, and yeah, majority of you think that the culture problems are the most serious, and followed by regulatory, legal, and language. So I'm hiding the results and giving the floor back to Miss Zhang. What do you, Miss Zhang?
So
what
could you just repeat? Could you just repeat the result again?
I see. Yeah. So what do you think about the results? 44% of our audience, they think that the culture problems are the most serious one, followed by 31% regulatory and legal, and then 20% with language, and only 4% thinks that the economical problems are the big challenge for the SMEs in China.
Okay, thanks, Ludmila. The results of both polls actually are not surprising. The first one, that's the mixed feelings and the positive in general for people who deal with Chinese partners. And the second one is the cultural and legal and the language problems. And economic reason obviously is the least concern, because China is probably, you don't have to ask people why they come to China, because it's where the growth is. So I think we have, apart from some of the business challenges that each business will face differently, we have also listed out some of the common challenges faced by EU and SMEs in China. For instance, the challenge of different culture, which came out in your poll, the challenge of different work style and dynamics that's related to culture and different value sets as well. The difference of working in different time zones and relying on different working type of technologies. The challenges of culture differences. In today's webinar, we will be focusing mainly on the four marked in yellow, which is culture and the related ones such as building trust and relationships, effective communications, and also some of aspects related to the legal and regulatory challenges. To talk about how to deal with culture differences, first we have to understand what culture is and why culture differences are important to us. What is culture then? Culture is the software of mind. It represents the shared values and assumptions of a specific group of people. and can be reflected, for instance, as personal values, attitudes, norms, behaviors, and artifacts. It not only provides a sense of identity, belongingness, pride, safety, but also efficiency, predictability, and so on. Therefore, when working with different cultures, one immediately face challenges such as uncertainty, tension, misunderstandings, the tendency to stereotype or label people from different cultural backgrounds, and the mentality of cultural superiority such as win or lose, us and them. In addition, people from different cultural backgrounds may also have different answers to some key questions such as what is important, what is worthwhile, what is urgent that priority should be given, what is reasonable and unreasonable. Yet, culture is hidden and is what makes us different. What can be seen above the waterline are norms, behaviors, and artifacts. These are visible. In other words, some of the verbal and nonverbal clues, such as body languages, are visible and easy to grasp. Personal values and attitudes are less visible, but can be talked about, whilst cultural values and assumptions are usually not visible at all, often held subconsciously, yet rarely questioned in our daily life. So different cultural values and assumptions may have great impact on our business interactions with our Chinese partners. We have concluded here 5 major aspects that cultural differences may impact our business interactions with others in China, such as different attitudes towards time, process, communications, hierarchy, and relationships. Our webinar today will be focusing more on the 3 aspects that may interest EU SMEs the most. For example, impact of cultural differences on relationship and trust building, attitudes towards hierarchy, and effective communication. So to understand the impact of Chinese culture on the business interaction with your Chinese business partners, it helps first understand the broad context of Chinese culture. In today's webinar, we will mainly focus on 3 cultural roots of the Chinese culture. First, as you can see from the first picture, it's the image of the traditional Chinese society. Despite the fast urbanization in recent years, agriculture is still considered as the root of the Chinese society. Even today, most of the Chinese population still live in the vast rural areas. This picture well captures the view of a traditional Chinese society in a sense it's the peasant farming. To survive, people have to collaborate. Harmony is considered extremely important to the commune-based economy. Also, family as the basic unit of the society at that point of time, and even now, the hierarchy within the family is clear and strict. So that explains the root of why the hierarchy is important, why harmony is important, why collaboration is important, and why certain compromises within the society are also important. And second, the Chinese culture is also heavily influenced for thousands of years by the greatest Chinese sages, the philosophers, such as Confucius and Lao Tzu that I mentioned here, and as you can see from the graph, the yin and yang forces. So Confucius, for example, emphasized the great importance of maintaining hierarchy to achieve harmony within the society. Of the 5 relationships he defined, only 1 relationship between friends was equal. The rest, he identified 4 other relationships, such as relationship between the ruler and the ruled, husband and wife. For example, in Confucius' view, the wife is supposed to be obedient to the husband. That's the hierarchy. And the parents and the children and the senior and the younger people. So all these relationships in Confucius' view are hierarchical. So that's why hierarchy is relatively important in the Chinese culture. Lao Tzu, for example, on the other hand, he emphasized the relationship of different forces, such as the relationship of yin and yang. Yin represents the feminine, dark, and passive forces, while yang represents the masculine, light, and active forces. Two forces are opposite. In Lao's view, these two forces actually complement each other simultaneously. They are inseparable and must be considered as a whole. So according to Lao Tzu, the key to life is to find the Tao. Tao in Chinese means the way between the two forces of the yin and the yang. Find the middle ground and compromise. Therefore, as you can see, compromise and harmony is also important in Lao Tzu philosophy. Such kind of philosophy also reflected in the daily dealings with Chinese partners. Chinese partners are more concerned with the means than the end. For example, the Tao means the way. It means that more emphasize the means than the result of the negotiation. And compromises are derived through the back and forth negotiation process as well. That's why when you negotiate with your Chinese partners, it's not the case that you can get a deal done in the first or second meeting, but you have to talk about or negotiate about it in back and forth negotiation sessions. Even the recent Sino-Swiss free trade agreement, it took 9 rounds of negotiations to get it done within almost 3 years, right? So the third route I can see, as you can see from the last picture, is the Chinese language. As the picture illustrates the Chinese language, the characters were first evolved on the pictographic basis. Therefore, Chinese characters are pictures rather than sequence of letters. This is one of the important reasons why Chinese tend to have holistic thinking instead of focusing on details. So when you negotiate with Chinese, you have to solve the whole package in terms of only focusing on, okay, let's talk about one issue, then the other. So now we talk about, because of the 3 roots of culture that we just mentioned of the Chinese culture, the agrarian origin, the traditional Chinese philosophy, and the pictographic Chinese language. It is now easier perhaps for you to understand the different set of basic cultural values and ways of thinking. For instance, Europeans tend to be more individualist or Western in general, while Chinese more collectivist, because in the old agrarian economy, you have to work with the group to be able to survive. European also emphasizes more on egalitarian, which means equality, while Chinese more on hierarchy. Also, Europeans are more focusing on information or facts-oriented, while Chinese are more relationship or friendship-driven. Europeans are more reductionist and less solve one issue after another, while Chinese have taken a more holistic view. No issues are resolved until the whole package is. European tends to have a more linear thinking, doing things in a sequential way, while Chinese have more holistic thinking, doing things in circular. Europeans tend to seek the truth, results matter, while Chinese tend to seek the way, the means are more important than the end. Last but not least, European has the argument culture. Let's debate until we find consensus, while Chinese tend to demonstrate diligence during the back and forth haggling or bargaining process. Ludmila?
Yeah, I mean, related to that, I have a question, which I think we talked about a little bit before, but I think it would be interesting to know. Our audience would be interested to know the answer to it. You mentioned the hierarchical attitude of the Chinese people. How it will work in the situation like this? There is a meeting between the foreign delegation and the Chinese delegation, and usually we can see, for those who participated in the delegation in such meetings, that the negotiation from the Chinese party is led by the most senior person in the delegation. However, the foreign or the European custom is that the delegation is, of course, led by the most senior person, but this person usually gives the opportunity to express the views to the junior members of the delegation. How that would be viewed from the Chinese side, for example, if the junior person does not agree with the views of the senior person in the delegation?
I guess it depends on the situation, because normally you were right. When you have very high level delegations, it tends to be the case that people at a higher level, they will set the tone of the discussion, and the people who are working on the details or at the working level, they will go through the details with each other. Although lower level people may challenge the more senior people from the other side, but I guess you have to take into consideration of the situation at that time. It could be the case that you can raise questions, I think, but the important thing to remember, to keep in mind, that you have to preserve the face of the most senior people of the Chinese side. If you think the question, I mean, if you don't have the pressing need to ask the question during that occasion, then perhaps you can either to get the senior person from your part to ask the question, or you can ask in a way which you don't make the senior person offended, or you make him, look like an idiot, right?
Yeah.
Not an idiot, is a bit exaggerating, but
Yeah.
look like he didn't know the answer. So I think it depends on the situation.
Okay, thank you, Anne.
Okay. So such kind of differences in basic cultural values and ways of thinking also lead to different approaches to negotiations. Now we talk about negotiations. For instance, for non-task sounding in business negotiations, what does non-task sounding mean? It means that the preliminary or small talk on non-business related topics at the negotiation table. Normally, for example, okay, how's your weekend? What's the weather? How's your family? And so on. But I think even from my personal experiences, the Westerners or Europeans tend to be very quick on this and very informal. I mean, they won't spend 5 or 10, maximum they will spend 5 minutes on this. For the Chinese, it takes time to digest. I mean, it has to, when you ask such type of questions, it has to show that you are sincere of asking such kind of questions. Also, in terms of approaching people, I mean, in the Western world or in Europe, that it's perfectly legitimate to make cold calls. But the Chinese would normally prefer to be introduced on intermediaries and so on. So then you would also, I mean, these are more non-business related issues, but it's very important to know, because through intermediaries, they know it's kind of, you already have the trust there. That also explains why Europeans tend to be more direct and usually have full authority at the negotiation table. And they would normally have prepared in great details of the proposals in the first place, while their Chinese counterparts tend to be more indirect and would like to understand or explain the context first. They will ask a lot of questions. In most occasions, the one who has the full authority would not be in direct negotiation with you. They may come in, as we mentioned earlier, to set the tone of the negotiation or the guiding principles of the negotiation, or come in later when the deal was done, or they can be used as the buffer, because the person who's at the other side of the negotiation table would say, okay, I need to get the authority for what we are discussing here. Also, as explained earlier, the Chinese aim at forging a long-term relationship, while that the Europeans are more focusing on transaction basis on getting a good deal. And in most cases, that Westerners tend to be more aggressive. Sometimes they show impatience when the discussions are not going according to what they expected. So these are the things that one need to keep in mind. So what do we do then? How do we gain a Chinese business partners' trust and manage expectations and avoid certain unnecessary misunderstanding? First, we have to address the mindset. Don't be ignorant. Such differences will not go away automatically, and you will have to deal with it later on anyway. And the second advice would be go there if you can. You may have heard about a lot about China, read a lot about China, and when you come to China, you are armed with a list of to-dos and not to-dos, with tips from your friends or business associates. But only when you arrive here, you may realize that things may turn out to be totally different. Things are moving fast here in China, and change is the only constant. So go to China to see it with your own eyes. Then the next one would be open-minded. Put aside your preconceived notion and embrace what you see, what you feel. Acknowledge that things will be different and try to understand why such differences are important to your business and your business success in China as well. What might be the potential impact and find ways to deal with such differences. I think the legal and the regulatory challenge came as the second in the poll earlier. So we will talk certain aspects about lay a solid legal foundations here as well. We wouldn't be able to touch every aspect due to the time sake. What I wanted to say is that there are a lot of challenges related to the legal structure and regulatory because it's a centrally organized country here. So regulatory challenges, bureaucracy, transparency, intellectual property rights, and contract agreements, and so on. These are the challenges which would be always there. I just wanted to give two examples here that you may be able to turn challenges actually into opportunities. In terms of the intellectual property rights, which concerns a lot of European countries, is that there is a Swiss company called Bulle, if some of you have heard of it, which they were making processing machinery for certain industries. When they were in China, they had a lot of copycats. So these copycats can replicate their products reasonably well, and they can sell at relatively cheap price. So what Bulle has done was that they actually acquired some of the copycats, and they actually created a new segment for their own company, a mid-segment, because these copycats, the Chinese companies, they are very quick to react to customers' needs, and their products are reasonably good enough for their Chinese customers, and they can be sold at relatively cheaper price. So what they did, they create a much bigger mid-segment, and for imported machinery and other products, they keep it at high-end products, and they have about 15 to 20 key accounts to manage. So this is one example that you can actually turn the challenges of intellectual property rights into business opportunities. And the second example I wanted to give is that when I was working in China more than 10 years ago for an American investment company, we actually signaled the change of the regulation. Of course, we have to work with the government and we work with other key parties such as the banks and so on. But we managed to, because it was the Asian financial crisis and our 100% offshore financing was not possible at that point of time. So we managed to get a first approval of partial RMB financing onshore. So just to keep it short. And I think one more thing I wanted to note here is also the contractual arrangements. Make sure you actually mitigate the risks through the contractual agreements. Disregard how much trust you believe you have with your Chinese partners and how solid the relationship is. Essentially, it's the legal document which is counts. I think in the last 2 to 3 years, we had heard examples, for example, Dana and Waha. The dispute, the fundamental problem of the dispute between Dana and its Chinese joint venture partner was actually the trademark ownership was not transferred to the joint venture. So essentially, Dana could not win all litigations across China and in other parts of the world. So the next we will talk about how to maintain a business relationship and handle conflict situations. So maintain a business relationship. Now after we have talked about the roots of Chinese culture and why there are different sets of values and approaches to negotiations, I think it's probably easy to understand why guanxi or relationship and trust are essential for you to do business in China. Second of all, I think when you deal with your Chinese partners, I think it's important to understand what's the motivations beneath the waterline, which just means, okay, apart from all the verbal and the body language, do you really get what the message is supposed to be? One important thing I think is probably universal is that focus on what's in there for your partner. Make their life easier. It will help yourself as well. Well, in other ways, put yourself in your partner's shoes and understand where they come from. And also make sure that your messages are clear. So clear communication is very important here for maintaining a solid business relationship in China as well. And last but not least, I think for most of the Westerners, please do set realistic timescale. Don't rush. For instance, well, I use the same example, the recent Sino-Swiss free trade agreement. I think it had been saying that it was coming several times, but eventually it was signed during the last weekend. But I think in most occasions, Westerners tend to have a more positive view on the timescale. They think we can resolve the issues and sign the deal. But as we mentioned earlier, there's a reason why Chinese would like to show diligence during the back and forth negotiation process as well.
Talking about the time, would you advise in a situation like this? I think quite usual situation. I come to the international trade fair. I meet many business partners in China. We exchange business cards. Everything looked perfect, very friendly, very promising. Once I'm back home, I send the emails and the proposals, and I'm awaiting the reply from the Chinese party. But the reply is not, or the replies are not coming back. What does it mean? I mean, how shall I interpret this? I mean, what is this? It's like they are not interested in, or they still need some time to think about the offer. And what is the usual time for the reply? I know it's quite difficult, but if you can give us your view.
Mm-hmm. I think briefly, there are perhaps several possible explanations for this. The first, I also noticed in recent years when I'm in China, when I go to an event or a trade fair or anything, that there are certain people you have to watch out that they are the card collectors. So they come to you, they exchange cards, they walk away, or they can have few exchange with you, but they walk away. These people are the ones probably who will never do business with you. Actually, I don't know what's the motivation for them to collect everybody's card. But certainly, there are a group of people like that, and you can see this type of people everywhere, almost at every event occasion. That's the first possible situation. The second is that, as we mentioned earlier, to explain the culture, is that the Chinese prefer that you come through a trusted channel. I mean, for instance, that if you can be introduced by someone they know, they would feel more comfortable with you. In this case, you met at a trade fair and you had the exchange of the business card and you contact that person directly. I think to a certain extent, certain people probably still would not take that, because it's better than cold calling, but still similar to making a cold call. So perhaps they would just ignore what's going on. And the third is possible the case that the person you contact with, I don't know when you talked with this person at the trade fair whether you had a translator or not. They may not comfortable with language. It could be possible a reason as well. So that's probably the three possible occasions came to my mind. But I think the key one, which is related to the culture aspects, probably is more the second one, is that people still are not really comfortable with cold calling type of business interaction.
Thank you, Anne. I would like to, at this point, encourage our participants, our audience, to send us your questions, which we will address at the end, during the 5 minutes at the end of our webinar. So please do not hesitate, send it to us, and we will come back to it at the end. Thanks.
Okay. So next, I often get questions from my Western friends that, do people always mean yes when they say yes? They say no when they say no. I had a client recently from Europe. They visited several factories and some of the banks and business partners in China. So we had a meeting after their visits. So they were asking me, they said, Anne, we got all these positive reactions from everybody, the factories, the bankers, and some of the other business associates. So do you think they're really positive? Can we really get the deal through? I said, look, I can't really tell you because I wasn't there. I can't interpret what's going on there. So just remember, in the Chinese business environment, yes doesn't always mean yes. Sometimes it's just when they nod or when they say yes, it just means that they heard you or they get your message. It doesn't mean they actually agree with you. Sometimes when they say no, probably doesn't mean no either. So that's just something that I think is important to keep in mind. And so how to manage conflicts? First of all, it's natural and it's perfectly normal when you deal with unfamiliar experiences. It can cause intercultural contact and tension and stress. That's just normal. Acknowledge it. And second of all, try to understand what's the motivation beneath the waterline. What's the read between the lines as well. And be careful about what type of communication style and choices you have made. For example, we mentioned earlier that the Westerners tend to be more aggressive, while the Chinese tend to be more passive in a way. And the communication choices means that in China, people prefer more face-to-face meeting instead of, for example, telephone conference, because this could be a combination of various reasons, such as language and also time difference and so on. And also face is extremely important in the Chinese culture because of the hierarchical reasons. As we also mentioned when Ludmila had one question earlier, is that are the junior people supposed to challenge the senior Chinese counterparts? I think just take into consideration of the face and the reaction of the other party. And also when you wanted to tell a message or deliver a message, should you tell as it is, or you have to kind of give the message in a way which is a more diplomatic? And also be aware that there's always possibility that we may stereotype culture. It's just natural. I think it happens to all cultures. Even Chinese would have certain stereotype towards Western cultures. But there are ways to decrease the stress and tensions. For example, first of all, we would have to accept that the ambiguity would always be there. And second of all, that we have to work together to try to reduce any of the other intercultural barriers. And the last, I think, is very important, just be forgiving. Be forgiving not only to your counterparts, but also to yourself. Just give both sides the benefit of doubt. So now we will share some of the best practices that we have concluded from our experiences or some of the people we know. First of all, yes, relationship and guanxi are important. But I think there's a tendency that's overrated. Recently, I was sitting on the panel of experts for an EMBA delegation in China. They had a one-week discovery trip here, so at the end they will have a presentation on the project they were working on. Almost every team said relationships are important. But my question is that, what do you mean the relationship here? The relationship with whom? Why it is important? So when you talk about relationships, it has to be in certain context. And yes, it's good that you have the awareness of that it's important, but just make sure it's relevant to your business. I think that's very important. Don't overrate it. And in China, people always do favors, right? It's not only the trust that will get you into the door. It's also that people will do favors for each other, and also they will return favors. So reciprocity is essential, although in the Chinese culture that it may not come immediately. I had a recent example that I helped someone in the States, in China, and immediately that person asked me, so Anne, can we do anything for you in the States? Or our team can do anything for you? And my reaction was, well, when I did the favor, I didn't even think about the return. But it would be nice that person asked. But still, in the Chinese culture, that it is important that you remember the favor from the others. And people will return the favor once sooner or later, but it may not be immediate. And the third, I think, is very important because I know a lot of European companies, especially SMEs. They rely a lot on the help from intermediaries. But it is important that you find the intermediaries who is professional, you find the right ones, and who are the right ones for you as well. I can't tell you at how many occasions that I think especially the SMEs, they find someone who can speak Chinese, but that person does not have the business experience or professional skills that requires to do the work in China. So for the company, and it would be a loss of opportunities as well, and it would be a waste of resources. The next, I think, getting the matching game right. What I'm talking about the matching game is in terms of the status. So whenever you come to China, make sure the level of people you are sending to China would be appropriate, because the Chinese will always see who you are coming, and they will send the equivalent of these people. There were examples of big companies. When they first started a negotiation of the major deal, they already sent in the CEOs. But then the problem is that the Chinese wants to have back and forth discussions. So later on, who are you going to send? The chairman? And after the chairman, who else would you send, right? Because the level goes higher and higher here. And don't attempt to do business without first establishing relationship and harmony. This is what we have talked about extensively earlier. And remember, means the way is more important than the ends, and the process is more important than the goals in the Chinese view. Also, nothing settles until everything is. We talked about this whole package, all the details. And remember, compromise or concessions from both sides are expected. So perhaps it's not wise just to give away the bottom line on your side in the first negotiation, so that you can always have certain leeways to go further with the discussions. And then broken promises, display of anger, aggression, would cause mutual loss of faith, and this are disastrous to any form of business relationships, I believe, in anywhere of the world as well. And also make sure you demonstrate endurance as hardworking, because Chinese prefer to show diligence work during the back and forth bargaining or haggling sessions during negotiation.
At the beginning, Anna, you talked about language as one of the culture barriers. I have a simple question. I have seen many foreigners who tried to learn a little bit of Chinese and speak during the meetings in Chinese from various reasons. I mean, just for example, to show the goodwill. How that would be perceived from the Chinese party? Wouldn't it be embarrassing for the foreigners? How they can see, how they can view the foreigners speaking bad Chinese? Isn't it something like you mentioned a few times, losing the face?
No, I think from all my experiences until now, I think if you can speak few words of Chinese, even if you can't, try to learn 2 or 3 words such as hello, thank you, this kind of words when you come to China. In most cases, you will surprise your Chinese partners, and they would be delighted to hear that, because it shows your curiosity in culture, and it shows that you wanted the friendliness you demonstrate. So I think it's a very positive thing to do. If you can speak few words, pop it out from time to time. If you can't, try to learn 2 or 3 words when you come to China. It's a good thing to do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I will just quickly talk about some of the other practicalities so that we would have still some time for questions and answers. So these are pretty straightforward, time zones and holidays, right? Be aware of the time differences. I noted that there are certain Western companies, especially multinationals. Their Chinese teams are always on telephone conference at very uncivilized hours in China. I think between Europe and China it's still relatively easier. So try to find a time which is convenient to both sides, not too late in the evening and not too early in the morning. And if you have to do that, try to do in turns. I think this will be appreciated by your counterparts as well. Also in China, you tend to have long holidays like the National Day, Chinese New Year, May 1st holiday. So try to be aware of that and note those holidays in your calendar earlier, so that you don't have to hassle people while they have to go on holiday and so on. And also in terms of annual leave, I think this can be talked about just in advance. You can, I think everybody more or less can organize that. It just takes a little bit of focus on details. And the next, I think the culture adaptation. So where, when, with whom, what kind of messages, and the relationship between external parties and internal parties sometimes would be different. For example, relationship with employees and versus relationship with government officials would be different. And how you wanted to deliver your message, formally at a meeting or informally at a dinner, and try to figure out what you hear versus what's read between the lines. And also trust. Don't assume trust will be there in the first place. Trust has to be earned, or if you're introduced by a trusted person, it can get you into the door, but you still have to earn your own trust. Language, I think it's important, even if you have translators, don't get lost in translations. Find a good one. Gifts and hospitalities, I think it's nice to have, but don't overdo it, because there are a lot of examples in terms of foreign companies involved in corruptions here in China. I think that went to another extreme. And also what to talk about, what not to talk about at a meeting for the non-task sounding or at a dinner. I think we can talk about this if we have time. So just a brief summary of some of the key takeaways from the webinar. First of all, adjust your mindset. Just be open. Be aware of that things will be different, and accept what it is. And remember, lay a solid legal foundation. It's the basics of whether you have the trust or relationship. It's the foundation of what your business is really all about here. Also understand the broader context of what would impact your business here in China. And the simplest thing, when in doubt, when you don't know what to do, use your common sense. And as we mentioned earlier, compromise is a fact of life here in the Chinese business environment. But make sure you do the right thing. Don't go with the local certain customs just because you have to do it. Make sure you do the right thing. Also, you have the opportunity to turn risks and the challenges into opportunities, like the bullet we mentioned earlier. Also, the last thing is that having learning and building capabilities as your objectives, not the financial gain. Make sure after a certain period of time, either yourself or you will have a team that will be able to have the ability to handle the business context here. And the final words I would like to say for any European executives or companies is that when you deal with the Chinese business culture, just be yourself, but give room to the others. So let's conclude today's webinar.
Thank you very much, and it was really interesting presentation and very important key messages at the end. We are coming to the end of today's webinar, but we have received a lot of questions, and I hope that we will manage to answer at least a few of them. So I will go straight away to those questions. What is the best way to approach a possible partner? Send a presentation in Chinese and make a phone call from a Chinese, for example. It's a question from one of our participants. So what would you suggest?
So presumably, I think the question is based on that you have to make cold calls, if I understood correctly. So maybe we can answer these questions from two levels. First is that if you have to make cold calls, don't try to send the presentation in the first place. You can send a brief outline and introduce yourself and see if the other party answers, because there's no point if you send a presentation but the other party doesn't get back to you, right? And the second is that if you already know someone who's the intermediary, try to get your first meeting, get yourself the foot in the door. So try to get a person that you know that person may have a connection with the person you wanted to reach. I think it's the same in Europe as well. Try to set up an initial meeting, and during the first initial meeting, you may not even talk about business at all, but you can already gauge the level of interest. So that's the advice I would give. Don't send too many details already in the first place. Try to get your first meetings or first contact, because as we explained earlier, it takes time to build the trust in China, and also sometimes the Chinese don't like the cold calls we receive.
Thank you. And then another question, is it acceptable to go up to a Chinese person at the expo or international fair or network meeting and introduce yourself directly, or should I get an introduction?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part of the question.
The question was, is it acceptable to go up to a Chinese person at the expo or networking meeting and introduce yourself directly? Or shall you go and get an introduction from someone?
Okay, I think it's always possible and it's perfectly okay if you go to an expo or to go to a networking event. You can get the cards, get the information, you can follow up on the discussions. But personally, I found those kind of events not so effective sometimes, although I think you may get 1 or 2 valuable contacts out of those events. That's already a good case. It would be always much better when you have someone that you can introduce you, but just be careful about intermediaries, because the relationship with the Guanxi network here in China sometimes is also very complex. So sometimes when you go through someone who's not really trusted by the other party, or who claim they have the relationship but not really, then you would, I mean, maybe it's better off you just go directly. So I think nowadays with more Chinese who actually have Western education, for example, the overseas Vietnamese, and for people who have lived abroad, for example, like myself, I think both situations are acceptable and possible. But again, if you have to go through an intermediate, make sure you have the right one. I can't tell you how to make sure about that part, but it's a due diligence you have to do anyway.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anne. I'm afraid this was the last question, online question for today. We have received about 15 other questions, which we will reply later on via email if you leave us your email address. I would like to thank you very much, Anne Zhang, for her presentation and answering all the questions on this very interesting topic, and I hope that we will have other presentations with you in the future as well. But I would like to thank you to all who were joining us today for your active contribution, and let's, yeah. One more thing, please. After we finish this this webinar, there will be a short survey. If you can kindly fill it your ideas, your opinions, your suggestions about the webinar, but as well the ideas about the possible future webinars, we would be very grateful. So this is the last information from our today's webinar. Thank you very much for the participation, and let's connect next Tuesday. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.